Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. At time of recording, the pro sumo scene is heating up. Aonishiki's on a Yokozuna run. Kirishima's back on an Ozeki run. Some surprise names are shooting up the ranks. So, obviously it's time to focus on someone completely different destroying the rules. Hiradoumi, if you're not familiar with him, is a little spark plug / bowling ball whose transmission is stuck in 5th gear. He's also become more and more famous for jumping the gun on the tachiai and getting away with it. He's not the only one gaining such a reputation, but fairly or not, he's the wrestler currently most associated with the practice. Of course, since we always have new people coming to the channel, if you're one of them, welcome. We need to lay the groundwork of what we're even doing here. The start of a sumo match, the tachiai, is only supposed to happen when both wrestlers have both hands on the ground, usually as fists. This is highly regulated in amateur sumo, since even when the wrestlers have their hands down, they need to wait until the ref says hakeoi to begin. It's looser at the highest levels. As long as the gyoji and head judge feel both wrestlers were prepared to start the match, they'll let the fight commence. This has led more enterprising rikishi, like Hiradoumi, to try and find little timing advantages on the tachiai. Again, he's not the only one, but he definitely seems able to have more matches like this, where he's out of the blocks while his opponent's still looking for his morning coffee than anyone else. That made me curious. How much does his ability to get started ahead of his opponent actually help? Is it just good for a win every so often? Are they why he made the Sanyaku back in 2024? Are they so crucial that he might not even be top division material without them? To figure this out, of course, I needed numbers. So I measured how far ahead he was of each opponent on the tachiai in 2025 and January of 2026. Since we're talking tiny fractions of a second, I went frame by frame, starting a count when he began moving forward and stopping the count when his opponent did the same. Also, because his opponents often moved forward while putting their hands down, I counted up to where their momentum was fully moving in one direction. Or rather, when their hands came up to move in the same direction as their bodies, again, usually forward. In matches where his opponent set up first and Hiradoumi had to trigger the fight, I did the same thing, just in the other direction. Given that some, but not all, opponents like to build momentum as they touch the ground, I knew this was a flawed metric. Different opponents would lead to very different levels of force meeting on the tachiai, even with Hiradoumi having equivalent head starts. But I couldn't find a better measurement, and this should at least do a good job of seeing how well Hiradoumi timed the movement of his opponents. One theory I had going in was, oddly enough, related to track and field. Sprinters are considered to have false started if they take off within 0.1 second of the gun going off. The rationale is that it's not possible to react any faster. Whether or not that's true, it's close enough that I figured if we're gonna see a difference in his results, it might only start when he has at least a 0.1 second head start. Since Sumo was streamed at 30 frames per second, that's 3 frames and up. So, how'd that theory work out? Not so good. From 2025 till now, he was 51 and 54 overall. The matches counted here are where Hiradoumi set up first. Negative frames mean his opponent was able to touch and start before he reacted. For these matches, in total, he was 40 and 43. Going with the 0.1 second theory, if we only count matches where he had at least a 3-frame head start, his record was 27 and 27. 50% win rate there versus 48.5% overall, not really a significant difference. There's not even a noticeable difference until the extreme end of the spectrum, and that's much too small a number of fights to take definite conclusions from. However, in the process of finding these measurements, I came across this fight against Ura, January 2025, Day 6. Hiradoumi's 1 and 4. He had pretty good head starts in his first 3 matches, but he only beat Shodai. Gonoyama and Ichiyamamoto set up ahead of him on days 4 and 5, making him start the fight, and both beat him. So things are not going well. He needs this win. Ura puts his fist down. Hiradoumi false starts. Side note, Hiradoumi false starts fairly often when his opponent puts one hand down. Sometimes it looks like he's just messing with their timing, and that may be the case, but I think it's more that he hopes they'll reach down at just the wrong time and he'll get a mega advantage. That would also track with why he does it less nowadays, especially against opponents who aren't as likely to fall for it. If it's not going to work, there's not much point, and there's no reason to piss off the elders unnecessarily. Anyway, they set up again, Ura's fist goes down, and Hiradoumi is already slowly leaning forward. Like, it's obvious he's gonna go with the first opportunity. He's basically taking off before Ura's hand even starts going down, yet he still gets away with this absolutely massive jump. How? The first reason is slow-mo versus reality. Watch it at speed, and although he obviously gets a head start, it's not as severe as other examples we could use. It's still a clear jump though. What matters more is that Ura snaps his hand down, showing he's ready to go. The ref and judges will generally let that go even if they shouldn't. Ura's best bet for getting another false start would have been to notice Hiradoumi leaning in and choosing to pause until he came out of his stance. And it would have happened. After all, Hiradoumi was already partway into his launch. Instead, Ura digs in and stalls Hiradoumi's movement, but that doesn't mean he gets to equality. By striking first, Hiradoumi had a better chance of achieving a position that was good for him. Once he did that, it may have taken a bit of time, but he was always in control of the fight. So that was a pretty easy win and a good example of the massive jumps Hiradoumi occasionally gets on his opponents. But I noticed after this match, Hiradoumi seemed much more restrained. He'd spent the first part of the basho really gunning for everyone. All of a sudden, it looked like he was making a very purposeful effort to stay in his spot until his opponent touched down, or at least got a lot closer to touching. For the rest of the basho, the only match where he got a really noticeable jump on his opponent was this day 12 match against Wakamoto Haru, and it 100% looks like Waka wanted that so his henka would work. That got me thinking, did Hiradoumi get yelled at to knock it off? It seemed possible. The lean-in was more obvious after the fact than in the moment, and the JSA could have felt it was too egregious to not say anything, even though they didn't feel it needed to be called at the time. And if that is what happened, did that mean he was jumping the gun more regularly in 2024 when he made Komusubi? So, I did 2024 too. If there was any question as to whether this metric could be meaningful, this killed it. 8-1 with essentially no head start, but 2-12 at that theoretical 0.1 second breakpoint. His average head start by frames was also 10% higher in 2024, but that didn't lead to doing much better overall. I think we can fairly say at this point that measuring frame by frame on its own doesn't give us useful data as to what helps him win. On its own, he says, that means other data might be meaningful. Yeah, I thought that too, so I checked a bunch of other stuff. Number 1, Hiradoumi's setup. By setup, I mean how he positions himself while waiting for his opponent to touch down. This might seem odd. Doesn't the guy who sets up first put both hands down? Generally, yeah, but starting in March 2025, going through May and part of July, Hiradoumi kept one hand slightly off the ground. This means, at least by the general rules, he has to put that hand down rather than just pop up when his opponent starts the fight. I found this intriguing. The main reason I can think of for this tactic is to technically not be in a ready position, let your opponent try to touch and launch forward quickly, and just sit there baiting a false start. But he never did that. Instead, he initially did a hand switch, pulling his down hand up as his floating hand goes down. This should still slow him down since it takes a split second to get the second hand moving forward. But the point of this is to mask the fact he's starting before his opponent, so if it allows him to get his body forward sooner than if he played it straight, it's a net win. Spiffy in the editing bay here, I realized after recording this that Hiradoumi started using this tachi on day 4 of March, which was right after he blew out Takeru Fuji in this match. So yeah, it definitely looks like he got yelled at and made this change in response. This method lasted all of March. He must not have been happy with it though, because in May he adjusted. And by adjusted, I mean he said "F it, we ride," and just went in without even pretending to touch down with his other hand. This lasted for a week. After that, he mixed it up between the hand switch and just going in. At first, I wondered if his opponents were doing something to force him to move faster in some matches, but no. It looked like he knew when he wanted to use one style or the other. But what effect did the change actually have? Well, the way I measured his head starts, this definitely slowed him down. He averaged 2.79 frames of head start over 34 fights against 3.34 when he set up first. However, even this lower average included 2 enormous should-have-been false starts against Nishikigi and Oho. Take those out, and his average head start was 2.34 frames, a full frame slower than in his usual stance. So there absolutely was a difference speed-wise, and if he was trying to go faster, it wasn't the difference he wanted. Of course, that differential could be at least partly due to how I counted the frames. Plus, any reduced speed advantage could be forgiven if he was happier with the overall timing and it led to more wins. His record was 15-19 overall, a 44.1% win rate. Take out the two outliers and he was 13-19. That's not a ton worse than everything else, and he had plenty of tough matches in that span, but if nothing else, it definitely wasn't better than his old Tachiai. By the end of July, he had both fists planted firmly in the dirt once again. 2. The opponent's touch. By that I mean, how does his opponent trigger the fight? I did this mostly for completeness. Hiradoumi can't control what his opponents do, but maybe it would tell him what works or doesn't work. Turns out there are so many variations on what can be done here, it became difficult to differentiate them. I ended up creating 3 groups, touching both hands at the same time, putting one down and then the other quickly after, and putting one down, delaying, then touching with the second. My numbers say I have a couple fights missing from this total, but those wouldn't change the trend. Hiradoumi's done a little worse when the opponent puts both hands down together. That's not surprising. For one, it's harder to watch the whole body come forward than a single hand, which matters if he's trying to time his initial movement perfectly. Second, it's more common when touching both hands together that the opponent is leaning into it, so their momentum comes forward and it's harder to move them the way he wants. He can't do anything about this, but maybe opponents who have trouble with him might give it a try. Anyway, we carry on. 3. Opponent rock. This one is how much momentum the opponent tries to gain going into the Tachiai. Basically, how much do they rock forward into their initial move. Hiradoumi can't control this either, but he can see it coming a little more than a speedy hand movement, so maybe this could give him something to watch for. I was gonna rate these 0 through 5, but then I saw this Takeru Fuji blast off, tagged it a 3 because that was the highest so far, and nothing beat it. So it's 0 to 3. 0 is touching down before coming forward at all. 1 is just leaning forward as part of getting one's hands to the ground. 2 is building some kind of extra momentum greater than we see in number 1, and 3 is Takeru Fuji, Kotozakura, and Hoshoryu. And these numbers tell us absolutely nothing either. Number 4, size of jump visual. In other words, how much of a head start does it look like he got? And you figure if anything is going to help, this has to be it, right? Slicing movement down to the frame doesn't show the differences in how much power goes into launching off the line, but being past the middle of the ring as your opponent stands up sure does, and the obvious ones should lead to more wins, right? This one I did rate 0 to 5. 0 is no visible advantage. 1 is an advantage that's only visible at 50% speed. 2 is a small but visible advantage at full speed. 3 is a sizable advantage. 4 is where the Gyoji probably should have said something. 5 is where he definitely should have said something. Negatives are where the opponent took off first. Aww. Again, pretty useless. Hiradoumi was 2-2 when his opponent had a small head start, 4-4 when he had a huge one. The poor record with him having a small visual advantage correlates mostly with more difficult opposition, which makes sense. The best guys should be proficient at not getting taken advantage of in such an obvious way. The thing I found most curious is that at the 0 level, where both wrestlers appear to launch at the same time, Hiradoumi went 11-4 in 2024, but only 9-14 from the start of 2025 till now. But that's all it is, a curiosity. Such a huge difference just shows that, on its own, this detail doesn't have a real impact on his ability to win. Number 5, strength of schedule. The last thing I'll mention might be the first one some of you thought of. What if he just happens to get a very similar head start on a lot of difficult opponents? He does seem to make a point of getting started as quickly as possible against certain guys. It doesn't really help though. Bad matchups for Hiradoumi tend to be really bad regardless, and good ones are usually quite good. A slightly mistimed or better timed Tachiai doesn't change that. So this was all kind of frustrating. Usually our breakdowns are based on something a wrestler's done and we're figuring out how he did it, determining the cause of a known effect. In this case, I investigated what Hiradoumi is doing, jumping the gun, and what effects might come of that cause, and it turns out there's not much. But there are those other matches where his opponent sets up first and he has to start. This is supposed to be the false start video, and he can't really false start in this position, but by this point I was looking for anything interesting. In 2025-26, if his opponent set up first and got the jump on him, he was 2-7. If they had a dead even start, he was 4-4. If he still got out ahead of his opponent, he was 5-0. Now that looks meaningful. That's a very clear gap, and it's the one we should logically expect too. So how about 2024? Again, completely different from 2025-26. He never got a head start, but was 8-5 when his opponent got the jump rather than 2-7. However, despite the year-to-year overall difference in the smaller numbers, there are some clear patterns with respect to his opponents. That 5-0 record with a head start, 3 were against Kinbozan, shocking. 1 was against Roga, which may be something to watch for if they meet again. The other was against Tobizaru. If we look at that larger collection of matches where his opponent had a head start, 3 of those wins were also against Tobi. Hiradoumi against Tobi in general is very interesting because they both usually leave each other plenty of time to set up first, but in the end, Hiradoumi always lets Tobi do it. Then he whips Tobi's ass, currently to the tune of 5-0. Put a pin in this. 3 other wins were over Churaumi. Chura's tachiai in these matches was essentially to not let Hiradoumi get out ahead of him, but he did that by standing straight up and becoming a giant bullseye. Hiradoumi was more than happy to take advantage. Of the other 4 wins, 2 were over Gonoyama, 1 over Midori Fuji, the other against Daieisho. On the flip side, across both years, the 12 losses when his opponent had the head start came against just 5 guys: Daieisho, Yoshino Fuji, Ichi Yamamoto, Gonoyama, and Aonishiki. So only 2 guys show up on both lists, Daieisho and Gonoyama. And out of 6 fights where Daieisho got the jump, Hiradoumi only won once. Broken clocks, twice a day, etc. The Gonoyama matchup is way more interesting. For Hiradoumi, he's basically the reverse of Tobizaru. Hiradoumi did his normal thing in their first 2 matches and won both. Then Gonoyama made sure to set up first, and Hiradoumi still beat him, running the head-to-head to 4-0. But Gonoyama stuck with it, finally won in January 2025 and again in May. And that was it. Hiradoumi no longer allowed Gonoyama to get his hands down first. So from a number of details, but especially this, we see Hiradoumi clearly pays a lot of attention to the aspects of the tachiai he can control. He wants to get set up first and attack. The opponents who set up first and hit him nearly always win, but that's currently just 4 guys, all of whom get to the line faster and don't give Hiradoumi much of a choice. Sure, he could move faster, I guess, but he's got his flow and he's decided he'd rather try to solve these puzzles than race to the line. But he does allow some opponents to set up instead. On this list, Tobizaru, Churaumi, and Midori Fuji. Their connecting thread is that none are threats to hit him very hard. And this, my friends, is where Hiradoumi's deep focus on the tachiai kicks in, with specific opponents and targeted situations. Yes, it's broadly helpful if he can put his opponents on the back foot from jump no matter who they are. Just because someone beats him by turning around a really bad start doesn't mean it wasn't a really bad start. He's always trying to create an early advantage because any advantage can potentially be exploited. But even though the statistics say this doesn't translate into much extra winning against Sumo writ large, it absolutely has benefits against the right guys. With that, let's meet Hiradoumi's biggest victim. Spiff? Hiradoumi's only 2-4 against Waka in the last year. What kind of spliff are you smoking, man? Yo, a spiff spliff. That'd be great merch. Okay, look. No, I haven't been smoking, and also, I'll come up with the merch ideas. Thanks. Yuria, can you draw a cat small enough to fit on rolling paper? Yes, by record, Hiradoumi has better matchups than Wakabro. There's the aforementioned Churaumi, Gonoyama, and Tobizaru, and that doesn't even include his 7-0 against Mitakeumi. But with respect to the subject of this video, Wakamoto Haru is by far Hiradoumi's biggest punching bag. All 10 of their matches have been from 2024 on, so they're all part of our data set. Here are the stats. I'm bringing all this in to make some comparisons. Against everyone in 2025-26, Hiradoumi had an average head start of 3.12 frames. Against Waka, it was 5.17. Against everyone in 2024, his average head start was 3.46 frames. Against Waka, it was 7.75. There was also only 1 fight out of the 10 where he didn't obviously have a head start without having to slow down the tape to see it. What he's trying to do to everyone, he's doing with significantly more success here. But he's only 6-4 against Waka. Plus, his head starts weren't nearly as big in 2025-26, and Waka beat him 4-6 in that time frame. Waka must be figuring him out, right? Even if he consistently makes Waka look slow on the tachiai, if Waka's winning, victim is far too strong a term, isn't it? Well, let's break it down. We can blow through the 2024 matches pretty quickly. May. Waka reaches down with his right hand nice and slow. His left doesn't move much faster, and Hiradoumi launches out of his cannon the instant it twitches. Waka does a decent job of leaning into Hiradoumi, but Hiradoumi's starting momentum carries them around the ring and essentially wins the fight. July. Waka does a little handspin with the right, touches, then drops the left. You'd think he would make some sort of change after how badly their first match went, but no, and Hiradoumi abuses him arguably worse than last time. September. Okay, now he makes a change. The right hand comes down with the left right behind it, but when Hiradoumi sees both of Waka's hands dropping, he takes off before either touches. In fairness to Waka, he absorbs the charge much better and drives Hiradoumi back to the Tawara. It seems like he's negated the head start, and it's simply unfortunate that Hiradoumi turns it around on him and wins anyway. But remember, every inch Hiradoumi steals on the Tachiai is an inch Wakamoto Haru has to make up. When Hiradoumi takes this much space, where his head is nearly over Waka's start line, that could be the difference between Waka getting him to the Tawara and getting him out. November. Waka tries something new. He does the little handspin with the right, but keeps the left a bit lower and moves it a bit quicker, again trying to touch them at the same time. And again, Hiradoumi's off well ahead of him and blasts him back for another win. It's 2025. We know Waka won the next three. This is the first from January, the Henka we saw earlier. But he can't do that every time, so how did he get 2 more wins immediately after this? Well, for one, here in May, Waka finally baits a false start rather than walk into Hiradoumi's jump. Granted, he got a little lucky. Hiradoumi's timing isn't much different than in their earlier matches, he just got the call. However, there is something else. Earlier on, I mentioned Hiradoumi has, or at least had, a tendency to false start when one hand went down. The follow-up is that, generally, he's been more careful on the second go not to false start. He's also using the floating hand Tachiai, which was again broadly slower for him than having both fists down. Combine those, and even though he does have a small head start and keeps Waka's right arm out of position early, for once he does not control the fight. Waka wins. July. Hiradoumi gets another clear head start here, but Waka uses that big arm scoop to get under Hiradoumi's arms and blunt his push. He gets Hiradoumi moving backwards just enough so, when it's turned around on him, he has the space to spin out of the way and let Hiradoumi fall past him. September. Hiradoumi's back to double fisting it, and kaboom! Waka gets pounded again. I know it might seem strange that having one hand off the ground would prevent Hiradoumi from doing this. I don't know, maybe he didn't get enough push off. Regardless, he's obviously better off with this style, at least against Waka. November. Hiradoumi gets such a big jump it might have thrown off his timing. To Waka's credit, he does manage to push Hiradoumi's arms over his shoulders, destroying the push, which is how he turns it around. But Hiradoumi wins this 9 times out of 10. And then January 2026. This one is probably the best Waka does at getting his hands down fast. Hiradoumi's off the line as quick as he can be, but his head start isn't as big as in most of the other fights, and he has quite a bit more difficulty taking this one. But it's also clear how his initial momentum spun things in his direction no matter how close Waka came to turning it around. So Hiradoumi lost to a Henka, lost twice while experimenting with a Tachiai change, and once more from a semi-miracle comeback. And if you don't think that Tachiai change mattered to Hiradoumi, keep this in mind. Apart from one random September match, that July loss to Waka was the last time he used the floating hand. At a glance, it looks like random timing. Why would you switch that with 4 days left in the Basho? But now we can see the reason. If it made him too slow to beat Wakamoto Haru, it's too slow. As such, an arguably more accurate description of their matchup history might be this. All of this leaves us with 2 questions. First, why can Hiradoumi do this to Wakamoto Haru and not really anyone else? Can't he take some of these things he does against Waka and apply them to other opponents? The answer is he does, or tries anyway. Sometimes the situation simply clicks though, and that appears to be the case for Hiradoumi against Waka. Even when Waka tries different methods for disrupting Hiradoumi's timing on the Tachiai, Hiradoumi just kinda knows when to take off. Don't forget, Waka's part of his own problem too. He could do what Kirishima does here and just stop when his hand isn't near the ground, forcing Hiradoumi's move to be a false start, but he doesn't. He nearly always moves in a way that shows acceptance of the fight, which lets Hiradoumi much more readily get away with these big jumps. And second, is there anything Waka or others who might struggle with these Tachiais can do to limit Hiradoumi's advantage? The answer here is yes, in theory. Understand, some guys just don't care enough to make this happen. Nishikigi has a legendarily slow Tachiai. Onokatsu's also very predictable. Onosato has messed with Hiradoumi's Tachiai timing, but still doesn't seem concerned with Hiradoumi getting big starts sometimes. And he keeps winning, so that makes sense. Going faster might disrupt his own timing, so if this is working, he might as well go with it. Oho, of all people, might have figured something out. Hiradoumi continually got way out ahead of him on the Tachiai in 2024 and absolutely blew him up this past May, but Oho closed the Tachiai gap substantially the last two Bashos. Of course, he lost both matches, but somehow I still think the answer isn't letting Hiradoumi take a running start at him. The guy to watch though is probably Hakuno Fuji. If we go way back to near the start of the video, there was this little piece of the puzzle. Of these 4 matches where opponents got the biggest jumps on Hiradoumi, 3 were Hakuno Fuji. They're not huge jumps, but he's the only one that can even do this consistently, so it still matters. Here's what he's done. First, baiting the false start never hurts. Anything that might make Hiradoumi hold back, even a twitch, is useful. Second, don't always use the same timing. Here, after the false start, his second hand comes down fairly quickly. In July, he inserted a delay, pausing and being very still for a moment before the second hand moved. And 3, don't touch the ground. Look, his second hand just scooped past the ground. It's not even close. Lo and behold, the secret is revealed. Hiradoumi's shenanigans can indeed be thwarted, but only by an equal and opposite measure of breaking the rules. Of course, other wrestlers should use caution when trying to apply the strategy. After all, it looks super effective, but Hiradoumi still won 2 of these 3 fights. And that's our breakdown of Hiradoumi's Tachiai, including, but not limited to, his famously egregious false starts. The purpose here is not to hate on the strategy, but to acknowledge and teach. After all, if you take anything away from this, I want it to be a better idea of how much Hiradoumi thinks about Tachiai strategy, not that he's a gigantic dickhead. Besides, I respect the hustle. It's much more on the Gyoji and the judges to say something. The main reason I wish they would is that it's not great for sumo, or any sport, for a casual viewer to see an athlete allowed to do something that's clearly against the rules they've learned and be left wondering what's going on or why that's allowed. But until the powers that be get on board with that line of thinking, hey, go off, King. In other news, Fluffy no Kawa is almost in the house. Our newest sumo kitten isn't just here to fight, he's putting in the work too. We'll have him ready for adoption over the weekend. That's all for now. Have a great day and a great basho, and I'll see you soon.